welcome to another episode of Monsters Manifested, right here on DM Tools with MaxMcCool. On today's episode, we're going to be beginning our journey through the Devil monster type with the Barbed Devil. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. The Barbed Devil's stat block can be found on page 70 of the Monster Manual, and its lore can be found on page 68. So, let's begin there, shall we? Barbed Devil, also known as Hamatula. Creatures of unbridled greed and desire, Barbed Devils act as guards to the more powerful denizens of the Nine Hells and their vaults. Resembling a tall humanoid covered in sharp barbs, spines, and hooks, a Barbed Devil has gleaming eyes that are ever watchful for objects and creatures it might claim for itself. These fiends welcome any chance to fight when victory promises reward. Barbed Devils are known for an alertness that makes them difficult to surprise, and they attend to their duties without boredom or distraction. They use their sharp claws as weapons or hurl balls of flame at foes that try to flee them. And that's all there is when it comes to the lore of the Barbed Devil. So pretty short and sweet and concise, but it does provide us with a bit of their behavior patterns and their disposition and their motivation. So I think we can use all of those things to create a compelling adventure or series of adventures that we could utilize for the players at our table. But before we get into all the adventure crafting and stuff like that, let's move on to the stat block, shall we? The Barbed Devil is a medium fiend, devil, with a lawful evil alignment. It has an armor class of 15, which is natural armor. It has hit points that average 110, or 13d8 plus 52, and it has a movement speed of 30 feet. The Barbed Devil has a strength of 16, a dexterity of 17, constitution of 18, an intelligence of 12, a wisdom of 14, and a charisma of 14. Its saving throws include strength plus 6, constitution plus 7, wisdom plus 5, and charisma plus 5. Its skills include deception plus 5, insight plus 5, and perception plus 8. The Barbed Devil is resistant to the damage types of cold, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical weapons that aren't silvered, and it is immune to the damage types of fire and poison. It is also immune to the poisoned condition. The Barbed Devil has the senses of dark vision for 120 feet and a passive perception of 18. It speaks the languages of infernal and telepathy for 120 feet and is a challenge rating of 5. Onto the abilities. Barbed Hide. At the start of each of its turns, the Barbed Devil deals an average of 5 or 1d10 piercing damage to any creature grappling it. Devil's Sight. Magical darkness does not impede the Devil's dark vision. And Magic Resistance. The Devil has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Onto the actions. Multi-attack. The Devil makes 3 attacks, 1 with its tail and 2 with its claws. Alternatively, it can use Hurl Flame twice. Claw is a melee weapon attack with a plus 6 to hit, a reach of 5 feet on 1 target. On a hit, it does an average of 6 or 1d6 plus 3 piercing damage. Tail. Also a melee weapon attack with a plus 6 to hit, a reach of 5 feet on 1 target. On a hit, it does an average of 10 or 2d6 plus 3 piercing damage. And finally, Hurl Flame is a ranged spell attack with a plus 5 to hit, a range of 150 feet on 1 target. On a hit, it does an average of 10 or 3d6 fire damage. If the target is a flammable object that isn't being worn or carried, it also catches fire. And that's all there is when it comes to the Barbed Devil. A pretty straightforward and simple introduction to the Devil monster type, I think, in the way of lore and stats. But sometimes simplicity is the best course of action when it comes to introducing a new monster type to a dungeon master or game master that is not familiar with how these entities or creatures operate. So I think that it gives us a lot of room to play with the Barbed Devil in terms of generating a scenario or an adventure around it and utilizing it at the table for our players to contend with. So with all that being said, let's move on to some adventure crafting. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind when I think of utilizing a Barbed Devil is probably also the most straightforward of scenarios, in that the players are in possession of an item that is of great interest or desire to the Barbed Devil. And because of the Barbed Devil's greed, it seeks out or stalks the party and tries to perhaps make a deal with them first in an attempt to exchange some favor or something like that for the item and their souls, or perhaps it decides to try and utilize a more combative angle and just immediately attacks them. So you could have something to the effect of your players have just come out of a dungeon and collected some loot. Perhaps the dungeon was a old temple or maybe an old cult hoard of sorts, perhaps a hideout or some place where some other individual, let's say, had stored up or vaulted away a bunch of old relics or ancient treasures, and your players, having been able to successfully go through there and acquire some of this treasure, in turn picked up an item that was of great interest or desire to the Barbed Devil. Now, with that same idea, you could also make the encounter with the Barbed Devil something present instead. So perhaps your players are sent off to investigate a rumor or a legend, myth, folklore. Perhaps there's something to the effect of a treasure map that they have or a book that leads them to this ancient vault of sorts where a Barbed Devil resides, or multiple, depending on the level of your party and how many players are at the table, that effectively keeps guard and is posted at this vault, protecting its earthly possessions, if you would. And so then you would immediately have an instance of conflict there where your players in the final room, or in order to get the key, let's say, to unlock the vault or the safe where all of these ancient shiny things are, is being protected and guarded by this Barbed Devil creature. And then you could even use that as perhaps a recurring theme if you wanted to, where the Barbed Devil is overcome, or rather, if the Barbed Devil is defeated and your players overcome it, they collect the treasure and stuff like that, and you have your Barbed Devil constantly chasing after them, or perhaps constantly sending other devils or ne'er-do-wells, perhaps its followers, perhaps it has worshippers or cultists that listen to it, perhaps it has made a deal with some seedy ne'er-do-well type individuals, and they chase the adventurers wherever they go in order to take back the treasure that was stolen from it and reclaim it and bring it back to their boss or master or whatever you want to call it in the Barbed Devil. You could also implement something very simply there where perhaps that isn't the case and it's more of just a happenstance situation. So just continuing with that line of thought, you have something to the effect of your players being sent off to a location where perhaps there's many treasures or a single treasure of great value, or that is of great age, it's very ancient, some relic of some sort. And as your players get there and have made their way through the dungeon and overcome the other monsters or traps and stuff like that, there also happens to be a Barbed Devil who has found out about this information and is there also trying to accomplish that goal and collect that relic. You could even have the Barbed Devil sitting around waiting and watching the party as the party clears out the dungeon for it. And then it only drops down once they manage to get that final door open or the vault unsealed or anything like that, right? And you could play on your players' paranoia or suspicions by describing to them this sort of sense of being watched that they constantly feel as they travel through these chambers or through these tunnels, this underground system or network of tunnels or caverns, anything like that, as they make their way to the final treasure room or hoard, if you would. Another way that you could utilize a Barbed Devil is in the way of something like a seedy criminal mob boss. Imagine Jabba the Hutt, if you would, style, where perhaps the Barbed Devil has a back alley sort of remote or little known about location where it resides, and it perhaps doles out bounties to sell swords and mercenaries and stuff like that, where they can go out and collect this treasure for it in exchange for something else. Obviously, as is typical for devils, chances are that in the deal or the contract that they sign or the bounty that they accept when they accept it, their soul is now bound to the Barbed Devil perhaps, and the Barbed Devil has perhaps a legion of future subordinates that it can use to fulfill its nefarious deeds and desires, right? So even in that, you could create an entire faction that is devoted to this Barbed Devil, and your players may not even necessarily know, because perhaps the rest of the region doesn't know, that at the top of this group or faction or guild, something like that, is actually a Barbed Devil that never really leaves its location of residence or its place of vigil, because it wants to constantly have supervision and surveillance over its possessions. And if you wanted to, you could even go a little darker, where perhaps its possessions are not exclusively material, right? Devils want souls. They want to obtain those contracts or signatures for those contracts for the exchange of a soul, so they can bring it back to the Nine Hells and create more devils to increase the army of devils. So perhaps what this seedy mob boss, Barbed Devil type creature wants to do is collect humans, perhaps collect humans of a specific significance or skill set, right? Perhaps the soul of a hardened general of the King's Guard is more valuable or more powerful of an asset than that of the soul of a common farmhand or of a serf, or perhaps of just a simple fruit merchant, right? So you can present something there where your players maybe think that this sort of seedy, sketchy guild or faction of bounty hunters and or let's call it criminal explorers or architects, where it's presumed that mostly they're trying to collect and steal relics and antiquities and stuff like that. There's this darker aspect to them that is actually the collection of humanoids and humanoid souls in order to be brought down to the Nine Hells to expand its ranks and its forces. And the collection of material items for and by the Barbed Devil is merely just a front, or perhaps not solely a front, but is really just the justification or the imagery or the idea that it wants to present, where it's like, yeah, these guys go around and they steal relics and they go into ancient tombs or into ancient temples or dungeons or places like that, and they steal away these relics and antiquities, items of power, items of great repute, and items lost to time, let's say. But, you know, it's not nearly as bad as collecting and rounding up humanoids and trying to bring them in. And you can take it as far or as near as you'd like with that, right? Perhaps they are trapped or imprisoned or incarcerated by the Barbed Devil in order to break their will and allow them to succumb to its desires and make the deal for their soul. Or perhaps it's something to the effect of a cat and mouse game, or a catch and release game rather, where it's like these people get scooped up or brought to the Barbed Devil. The Barbed Devil sits them down and says, listen, you're going to sign this contract and you have to agree to it. Otherwise, we're just going to kill you here on the spot because you're no use to us. And out of desperation, the people agree to the terms and they sign, and their soul is now forfeit. Perhaps they decline, they say no, and they get killed on the spot. Perhaps one of the individuals that got taken is an NPC or a character of significance to your players. And then that'll really get them going and make them want to investigate what's happening and what's going on and why suddenly not just the people of this town are going missing every once in a while, let's say, or certain peoples of notoriety are going missing, but now a significant individual to them and their place in the world is gone, right? Be it a friendly merchant or a relative of one of the players, or perhaps a lord or a general, or perhaps just another adventurer or individual that they had a good interaction with and they like to communicate with, or perhaps trade with in gold or items or stories, stuff like that, has now effectively gone missing. I think that they would have a compulsion to investigate and see what's going on. Another way that you could utilize a Barbed Devil in a smaller scale of that sort of criminal boss, seedy underbelly guild faction aspect is that of a Barbed Devil who has made a deal with perhaps a merchant or some sort of trader of some form or fashion, and the players are now enlisted by this merchant to collect these items. And perhaps it's not a recurring quest giver, let's say. Perhaps it's only 1 or 2 times or something like that whilst they're in the region, but the players wouldn't know any better or any different, rather. And this individual gives them gold, gives them items, lets them keep some of their findings, let's say, from going through these dungeons and collecting these items for them. And the players then have participated in the offering up of items and treasures to the Barbed Devil unknowingly. And you could then bring that around full circle later on down the line as they come back to interact with that merchant, or perhaps there's a confrontation, or perhaps this merchant conveniently appears right as the players complete their journey through the dungeon and successfully collect the loot. As soon as they walk out, this traveling merchant, let's say, appears and says, "Oh, great, what a perfect timing. We can have an exchange right here. That stuff looks heavy. I can give you a quick buck just to take it off your hands right here and now." And your players could do that without being the wiser. And when suspected of some oddity, or when perhaps confronted by them, the merchant basically says, "Well, yeah, I've been following you guys because you seem to be very good at what you do and you're very successful at clearing out dungeons and collecting these treasures. And as a merchant, I can make a lot of money reselling these items. So I like to sort of follow your guys' trail a little bit and be here to pick up whatever items you may find and not want and sell them off at the towns that I pass through," right? And I think that if you use that aspect, or I think that if you use that traveling merchant in that way, which obviously all in all, like at the end of it, is serving this Barbed Devil that it's bound to by one way or another, if you use that merchant a bit more sparingly than consistently or constantly, then it allows for a sort of curious, odd, quirky NPC to appear that your players might enjoy interacting with or might appreciate, or they might not and be immediately suspicious. But either way, it provides a bit of intrigue to the players. All in all, though, I do think that the Barbed Devil is a decent monster, a good starting point for sure for devils. It's pretty short and sweet. It's concise in its lore, it's concise in its stats, and it's a nice jumping off point for DMs to develop some quick adventure ideas and scenarios to put their players into, and give both the DM and the players their first exposure to the devil monster type and sort of the behavior and patterns that they utilize. But with that being said, that's all I got for you fine folks today when it comes to the Barbed Devil and how you can implement it in your adventures or scenarios for your table. I'd like to thank you all very much for tuning in. I highly appreciate it. On the next episode of Monsters Manifested, we're going to be continuing this journey through the devil monster type with the Bearded Devil. So that should be pretty interesting, and we'll see how similar and or different it is from the Barbed Devil. But until then, thank you all very much for tuning in. Once again, I highly appreciate it. Please feel free to subscribe, follow, leave a rating, leave a comment wherever you can, share it if you'd like to. all of that great stuff, as I would highly appreciate it. If you're listening to this episode of Monsters Manifested on YouTube, I'd kindly ask that you like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all those magic buttons that do amazing things, as I would highly appreciate it. It would help me out, help the podcast out, help it grow, get it to more ears, get it to more people who may want or need a little bit of inspiration or some help in generating ideas for developing some adventures and campaigns and scenarios for the players at their table. But with all that being said, thank you all once again very much for tuning in. I'm MaxMcCool, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good day, everyone.